The smell of fresh bread mingled with the damp, musty odor of the bunkers in Malo, France, in the summer of 1944. The port city had been under siege for weeks. Allied forces, advancing through Brittany, faced tenacious and relentless German resistance. Inside the ancient walls, civilian life was an exhausting routine of scarcity and fear. While the distant sound of artillery was a constant reminder of the ongoing battle, the most pervasive dread was hunger. Madame Dubois, the head cook of the makeshift refugee camp in the old Saint-Vincent church, was the soul of the place. Her 60 years seemed burdened with the weight of every meal she stretched to feed hundreds of starving mouths. She moved with a quiet determination, her eyes observing every detail, every gaunt face. Antoine, her 17-year-old grandson, helped her with equal diligence. He was thin but strong, and his eyes, despite the deprivation, held a spark of hope. Antoine, unlike many young people, didn't dream of fighting. He dreamed of surviving and, more importantly, of protecting his grandmother and the community she loved so much. It was a simple dream, but increasingly difficult to maintain. Resources dwindled daily. Flour, salt, even potable water were rationed with painful care. Food became increasingly tasteless, and people's energy more depleted. The strict rationing imposed by the occupying forces meant that any mistake in the kitchen could have terrible consequences, not only for the refugees' health, but also for Madame Dubois' safety. One day, a German officer, Major Schmidt, a cold, calculating man who oversaw the camp's provisions, made an unexpected visit to the kitchen. His presence was always a harbinger of trouble. He inspected everything with a suspicious gaze, measuring the scarcity as if it were Madame Dubois' fault. "The flour ration will be reduced by another 10% starting tomorrow," he announced bluntly. "And vegetables, only half of what was promised. Supply lines are compromised." A collective sigh of despair echoed through the kitchen. Madame Dubois, however, maintained her composure. Her eyes met Antoine's, and a silent understanding passed between them. It was an unsustainable situation. People were already on the verge of collapse. She knew something had to be done. But what? How, amidst that suffocating siege, could she find a solution? The truth was that Madame Dubois had a secret that could change the fate of everyone there. But revealing it meant an unimaginable risk. If you're enjoying the story and want to follow the next chapters of this thrilling journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates. The news of the new ration reduction spread like wildfire through the camp. Despair hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Madame Dubois, however, did not surrender to hopelessness. On the contrary, the situation spurred her to action. That night, by the flickering light of a candle, she reviewed her old recipe notebooks. Her wrinkled fingers turned the yellowed pages, filled with notes and scribbles. She was looking for something specific, something that could serve as a vehicle for her daring idea. Her mind buzzed with the need for communication. How could she send a message to the Allied forces outside the walls? The obvious methods, carrier pigeons, clandestine runners, were closely watched and too risky. It was then that her eyes landed on an old recipe for pain de campagne, a rustic, long-lasting bread. A spark ignited in her eyes. The recipe, with its detailed instructions on ingredients, fermentation times, and oven temperatures, was, in its essence, a set of precise data. What if she could modify that data to carry a message? Antoine, sitting near her, felt the change in his grandmother's mood. "Grandma, what are you looking for?" he asked, his voice low, so as not to break her concentration. Madame Dubois looked up, a glint of determination in her gaze. "I'm looking for a way to feed more than just our stomachs, my dear," she replied enigmatically. The idea was audacious and dangerous. She would need a way for the modified recipe to reach the right hands. And the only viable means was through the Germans themselves, who occasionally inspected and even requested food samples for their own high-ranking officers. The next day, Madame Dubois began to test her theory. She took the pain de campagne recipe and started encoding a simple message of distress and information about German defenses. Each ingredient quantity, each cooking time, each oven temperature was meticulously altered to correspond to a code she had secretly developed over the years, a variation of a cryptographic code her husband, a former math professor, had taught her. Salt would represent the number of soldiers, flour, the location of machine guns, fermentation time, the strength of defenses. It was a silent language, hidden in plain sight. Antoine watched his grandmother work with a mix of admiration and dread. He knew she was plotting something, but he couldn't imagine the true extent of her plan. The kitchen, once a place of mere subsistence, became a laboratory of resistance. The weather in the city worsened daily. The distant sound of artillery was a constant reminder of the battle raging outside. Madame Dubois knew her time was running out. She needed to be fast and, above all, precise. One mistake would mean not only the failure of her mission, but possibly the death of many. Executing the plan required meticulous precision. Madame Dubois not only needed to encode the message into the recipe, but also ensure it reached the correct hands. She knew that German officers occasionally took bread samples for their own superiors. Her best chance was to make the bread so exceptionally good, so enticing, that it would be offered to the higher echelons of the German command, perhaps even to those outside the immediate siege lines. She began to experiment, not with new ingredients, but with the careful manipulation of the existing ones according to her code. The subtle changes in the pain de campagne recipe were almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, yet each measurement held a critical piece of information. The challenge wasn't just the coding, it was the delivery. She needed to create a consistent demand for her bread among the German officers, particularly Major Schmidt. Madame Dubois, despite her quiet demeanor, possessed a sharp wit and a shrewd understanding of human nature. She knew Schmidt was a man of routine and a connoisseur of good food, a rare luxury in their besieged conditions. She started subtly adjusting the flavor and texture of her daily bread, making it just a little more appealing each day, always maintaining the coded message within. She would offer small, polite samples to Schmidt during his inspections, always with a humble smile. "Just a small treat, Herr Major, to keep up spirits," she'd say, knowing full well the underlying intent. Antoine, now fully aware of his grandmother's dangerous game, became her silent accomplice. He helped her grind the flour with extra care, ensuring the consistency that was crucial for her coded measurements. He listened intently to every snippet of conversation, every rumor that filtered into the camp about German movements, passing on any useful detail to Madame Dubois. His young eyes, sharp and quick, spotted any unusual German activity, which he then subtly incorporated into the ever-evolving recipe. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, a silent hum beneath the surface of their daily tasks. The stakes were incredibly high. A miscalculation, a single misplaced number in her recipe, could lead to disaster. One afternoon, during one of Major Schmidt's routine inspections, Madame Dubois presented him with a loaf of her latest pain de campagne. The aroma was irresistible. Schmidt, usually stoic, inhaled deeply. "This is exceptional, Madame Dubois," he conceded, a rare hint of appreciation in his voice. "I shall take this to General Richter. He has been complaining about the rations." Madame Dubois' heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained impassive. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The coded message, a desperate plea for aid and crucial intelligence on the German defenses, was now on its way to the enemy's high command, a silent bomb wrapped in a crust of bread. The weight of hope and fear pressed down on her, but for the first time in weeks, a flicker of genuine possibility shone in her eyes. The tension in the camp after Major Schmidt took the bread was unbearable for Madame Dubois and Antoine. Every passing hour felt like an eternity. They watched the main gate, listened to every distant sound, searching for any sign that their desperate gamble had paid off. The constant rumbling of distant artillery fire and the occasional crack of a rifle only heightened their anxiety. Had the message been deciphered? Had it even reached the right person? The uncertainty was a heavy cloak, smothering any hope that dared to emerge. Madame Dubois continued her daily routine, her hands busy with the usual chores, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail of the coded recipe, praying for its success. Meanwhile, the loaf of pain de campagne made its way through the German command structure. Major Schmidt, true to his word, presented it to General Richter, who was holed up in his command post, grumbling about the lack of fresh provisions. Richter, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol, but also for his refined palate, was immediately struck by the bread's superior quality. He appreciated the subtle nuances in its flavor and texture, far beyond what he expected from a besieged city. He even commented on the unusual yet harmonious proportions of the ingredients. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the Allied intelligence had been anticipating a coded message of this exact nature. A network of French resistance contacts, aware of Madame Dubois' hidden skills and her previous, albeit small-scale, acts of defiance, had established a contingency plan for just such an event. They knew she might attempt to pass information disguised in plain sight. General Patton's forces, pushing hard towards St. Malo, were desperate for specific intelligence on German strongpoints and troop movements within the heavily fortified city. Without precise data, a direct assault would result in catastrophic casualties. Back in St. Malo, as night fell, the air grew colder, and a thin mist began to roll in from the sea, blanketing the city in an eerie silence. Madame Dubois and Antoine huddled together, sharing a meager supper, their conversation hushed. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the quiet, the distinct rhythmic thud of Allied artillery. But this time, it was different. It wasn't random shelling, it was precise, concentrated, striking specific points within the German defenses. The ground trembled. Explosions rocked the city, not near the civilian shelters, but targeting the heavily fortified bunkers and machine gun nests that Madame Dubois had detailed in her recipe. A glimmer of hope, fragile yet undeniable, began to bloom in the hearts of the besieged. If you're gripped by this story and eager to see how the siege ends, subscribe to the channel right now. Don't miss the dramatic conclusion. The night was a symphony of chaos and destruction. The precision of the Allied bombardment was terrifyingly effective. Explosions ripped through the German lines, each blast a testament to the accuracy of the intelligence received. Madame Dubois and Antoine listened from the relative safety of the church's crypt, a designated shelter during heavy shelling. The usual indiscriminate bombings were replaced by targeted strikes. They could hear the distinct sound of fortifications crumbling, the desperate shouts of German soldiers and the piercing wail of air raid sirens, now sounding more frantic than before. Antoine, pressed against his grandmother, whispered, "Grandma, is this because of your bread?" Madame Dubois could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. Tears of fear, but also of an overwhelming, fragile hope. Outside the city walls, the Allied forces, spearheaded by General Patton's Third Army, launched a coordinated offensive. The intelligence gleaned from Madame Dubois' recipe was invaluable. It provided precise locations of command posts, ammunition depots, and troop concentrations that aerial reconnaissance couldn't fully confirm. Armed with this knowledge, their artillery batteries unleashed a devastating barrage, neutralizing key defensive positions with surgical precision. The German commanders, caught off guard by the accuracy of the attacks, found their communication lines severed and their strategic points obliterated. The siege, which had seemed impregnable, was rapidly unraveling. Inside St. Malo, Major Schmidt and General Richter were in disarray. Richter, furious, demanded to know how the Allies had acquired such detailed information. He paced his shattered command post, littered with debris from a near miss, his face pale with rage and confusion. "It's impossible! We've maintained radio silence. Our positions are disguised," he roared. Schmidt, equally bewildered, could offer no explanation. The sudden shift in Allied tactics, from a grinding siege to a swift, targeted assault, was baffling. They were facing an enemy who seemed to know their every secret. The once formidable German resistance was collapsing under the weight of precise and relentless attacks. As dawn approached, a tense quiet settled over the city, broken only by the distant sounds of battle receding. The bombing had ceased. Cautiously, people began to emerge from their shelters. The air was thick with dust and the smell of smoke, but there was a new, unfamiliar sensation, a stillness that wasn't oppressive, but expectant. Madame Dubois and Antoine ventured out into the ruined streets. The destruction was immense, but as they looked towards the main gate, they saw something that made their hearts leap. The German flags that had flown defiantly over the city for weeks were gone. In their place, a small, triumphant American flag fluttered in the morning breeze. The siege was over. The news of the liberation spread like wildfire through the camp. A wave of exhilaration, mingled with disbelief, swept over the war-weary population. People cautiously emerged from their shelters, their faces pale but eyes alight with a fragile hope. The German presence had vanished overnight, leaving behind a trail of shattered defenses and abandoned equipment. French resistance fighters, who had been operating covertly within the city, now openly emerged, their makeshift armbands a symbol of newfound freedom. They were quickly joined by the first Allied patrols, American soldiers cautiously entering the city, their faces grim but their movements resolute. Madame Dubois and Antoine, hand in hand, walked through the streets, now strangely quiet, despite the lingering signs of battle. The devastation was heartbreaking: ruined buildings, scattered debris, the scars of relentless shelling. Yet amidst the destruction, there was an undeniable sense of relief, a collective exhale. They saw other civilians, some weeping openly, others embracing, their long-held fear finally giving way to joy. Antoine, looking around at the changed landscape, asked, "Grandma, what happens now?" Madame Dubois, though weary, managed a small smile. "Now, my dear Antoine, we begin to rebuild. We begin to live again." The immediate aftermath was chaotic, but organized. Allied troops began distributing emergency rations, and the meager food supplies in the camp were supplemented with fresh provisions. Medics attended to the wounded, and engineers started assessing the damage to infrastructure. For the first time in weeks, the aroma of something other than stale bread and fear filled the air. Soldiers and civilians worked side by side, clearing debris, tending to the injured, and sharing stories of survival. The mood was one of cautious celebration, a quiet understanding that the immediate danger had passed, but the long road to recovery lay ahead. Major Schmidt and General Richter, along with their remaining forces, had retreated in disarray, their morale shattered. The German High Command was furious at the sudden collapse of St. Malo's defenses, unable to comprehend how their heavily fortified position had been so swiftly overwhelmed. The precision of the Allied strikes remained a mystery to them, a perplexing puzzle that defied their intelligence assessments. Back in St. Malo, Madame Dubois, though celebrated by her community, remained humble, never explicitly revealing the true extent of her role in the liberation. She simply continued to do what she did best, feeding her people, but now with a renewed sense of purpose and an abundance of hope. The weight of her secret was now replaced by the light of freedom. In the days following the liberation, St. Malo began its slow, painful process of healing. The initial euphoria gave way to the daunting reality of rebuilding a city scarred by war. Madame Dubois, despite her quiet heroism, found herself at the heart of the community's efforts. The refugee camp in Saint Vincent Church was slowly dismantled as people began to return to what remained of their homes or sought refuge with relatives in less damaged areas. Her kitchen, however, remained a central hub, not just for food, but for solace and connection. She continued baking, her recipes now featuring more ingredients, a symbol of renewed hope. Allied engineers worked tirelessly to restore essential services, water, electricity, communication lines. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the terrifying roar of artillery. American soldiers, once viewed with suspicion or fear, now walked the streets as liberators, sharing cigarettes and chocolate with the children, their presence a tangible sign of peace. Antoine, with his youthful energy, became an indispensable helper, assisting the Allied engineers with clearing rubble and translating between the French civilians and the English-speaking soldiers. He learned quickly, his once sheltered world expanding with every interaction. One afternoon, a tall, stern-looking American intelligence officer, Colonel Davies, arrived at the former refugee camp. He had been sent to debrief key individuals who might have had contact with the resistance or possessed valuable information about German activities. He approached Madame Dubois, who was kneading dough with her usual calm efficiency. "Madame Dubois," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "my reports indicate that your pain de campagne was quite popular with the German officers. We believe a particular loaf may have played an unexpected role in our recent success." Madame Dubois paused, her hands still. She looked at Colonel Davies, her eyes betraying nothing. She had anticipated this moment, knowing that her unusual actions might eventually draw attention. Antoine, sensing the gravity of the conversation, moved closer to his grandmother. Davies continued, "The information we received was incredibly precise, almost as if it came directly from inside their command. We're trying to understand how such specific details could have been transmitted." He held her gaze, a silent question in his eyes. Madame Dubois considered her answer carefully. The weight of her secret, once a burden of fear, now felt like a responsibility to protect the integrity of her small, personal act of defiance. If you're captivated by Madame Dubois' incredible story and want to see how she navigates this new challenge, subscribe to the channel to catch the next gripping chapter. Madame Dubois chose her words carefully, her gaze steady as she faced Colonel Davies. "Monsieur le Colonel," she began, her voice calm and firm, "in times of great need, one must find strength in unexpected places. My recipes are a part of me, a reflection of my life and my family. They are, perhaps, more than just lists of ingredients." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, allowing Davies to draw his own conclusions. She knew the intelligence officer was intelligent enough to piece together the implications without her explicitly admitting to espionage. Antoine, standing by her side, watched his grandmother with a mixture of awe and fierce pride. Davies, a shrewd observer, understood. He saw the subtle hints in her posture, the quiet dignity in her eyes. He had dealt with countless individuals in the war, but few possessed such an understated power. He didn't press for direct confirmation. The precise details of how the message was encoded didn't matter as much as the fact that it was delivered. "Indeed, Madame Dubois," he replied, a hint of respect in his tone. "Sometimes the simplest things hold the greatest power. Your unique contribution, however it was achieved, was instrumental in saving many lives and bringing this siege to a swift end. On behalf of the Allied forces, I extend our deepest gratitude." The conversation was brief, but profound. Colonel Davies understood that pushing for more details might compromise Madame Dubois' safety or her quiet way of life. He simply needed to confirm his suspicions and acknowledge her extraordinary bravery. He assured her that her actions would be recognized in the proper channels, though not publicly, to protect her from any potential reprisals. Madame Dubois merely nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. The acknowledgement, unspoken yet clear, was enough. Her secret, while still hers, had been seen and validated by those who mattered. Life in St. Malo continued its slow return to normalcy. The Allied presence was gradually reduced as the front lines moved further east. Madame Dubois' kitchen became a symbol of resilience, a gathering place for stories and shared meals. She continued to bake her pain de campagne, sometimes adding a touch more salt, sometimes less, a private nod to the coded messages of the past. Antoine, inspired by his grandmother's courage and ingenuity, began to envision a future beyond the war-torn city. He saw the potential for connection, for communication, for using ingenuity to overcome obstacles. He started spending more time learning about radio technology, fascinated by how messages could travel across distances, a stark contrast to the hidden messages in his grandmother's recipes. The shared experience had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a quiet understanding of the power of ordinary people in extraordinary times. As the war eventually drew to a close and peace slowly returned to France, St. Malo, though scarred, began to bloom anew. The city's ancient walls, once a symbol of its besieged state, now stood as a testament to its enduring spirit. Madame Dubois, while never outwardly celebrated as a hero, became a revered figure within her community. Her small bakery, now properly rebuilt, thrived. People came not just for her delicious bread, but for her quiet wisdom and the sense of stability she offered in a world still reeling from conflict. She was the anchor, the quiet strength that had seen them through the darkest days. Antoine, now a young man, chose a path that echoed his grandmother's silent heroism. Instead of pursuing a life of combat, he dedicated himself to rebuilding. He trained as an engineer, specializing in communication systems. He worked tirelessly on restoring telephone lines, setting up local radio broadcasts, and ensuring that isolated communities could reconnect with the outside world. He understood the profound importance of information and connection, a lesson he had learned firsthand from his grandmother's courageous act. He often visited her, sharing his progress, and she would listen with pride, her eyes reflecting the quiet satisfaction of seeing her legacy of ingenuity take a new form. Their bond remained unbreakable, a silent understanding passing between them. They rarely spoke of the coded recipes or the siege, but the memory was always there, an invisible thread weaving through their lives. Madame Dubois found peace in the simple rhythm of her bakery, the warmth of the oven, the familiar scent of rising dough. She saw the new generation, full of hope and determination, taking the reins of recovery, and she knew that her small, audacious act had contributed to this future. She had played her part in saving her city not with weapons, but with flour, water, and an unwavering spirit. Years turned into decades. St. Malo was rebuilt, its beauty restored, its history etched into every stone. Madame Dubois lived a long and fulfilling life, surrounded by her family and the community she had so quietly saved. Antoine, now a respected engineer, would occasionally visit the old church where the refugee camp had been, remembering the fear, the hunger, and the incredible bravery of his grandmother. He carried her lesson with him, that even in the most desperate circumstances, courage and ingenuity, no matter how subtly deployed, could change the course of history. The legacy of Madame Dubois, though largely untold to the wider world, lived on in the hearts of those she had touched. Her bakery, passed down through generations, remained a cornerstone of St. Malo, a place where the aroma of freshly baked bread carried whispers of resilience and quiet heroism. Antoine, who eventually became a prominent figure in France's post-war technological reconstruction, often reflected on his grandmother's extraordinary act. He recognized that her bravery wasn't just about a single coded message, it was about the profound belief in the power of ordinary people to make an extraordinary difference, even when faced with overwhelming odds. He often spoke to his own children and grandchildren about the war, not in terms of grand battles, but through the lens of individual courage and ingenious survival. He would share stories of the scarcity, the fear, and the quiet determination of the people of St. Malo. While he never fully divulged the precise details of the recipe to them, he emphasized the importance of using one's unique skills and knowledge to help others, no matter how small or unconventional the method might seem. He taught them that true strength lay not just in overt acts of defiance, but in the subtle, intelligent resistance that could unravel an enemy from within. St. Malo, having endured so much, flourished as a symbol of French tenacity. Tourists flocked to its ancient ramparts, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded within those very walls. The story of the siege became a chapter in history books, often focusing on the military strategies and the Allied forces' triumph. But for those who lived through it, especially those who knew Madame Dubois, the memory of a simple cook and her audacious message remained a poignant reminder that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected places. Madame Dubois passed away peacefully in her sleep, many years after the war, a quiet legend in her own right. Her funeral was attended by countless people from St. Malo, a testament to the profound impact she had on their lives. Antoine, by her graveside, felt a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He realized that her story wasn't just about ending a siege, it was about the enduring human spirit, the power of community, and the quiet dignity of a woman who, with a handful of flour and an unbreakable will, smuggled hope and freedom into a recipe, changing the course of a battle and the lives of an entire city. Her legacy was a testament to the fact that courage, in its most authentic form, often wears the apron of an ordinary person doing something truly extraordinary. That's the end of this compelling story. If you were moved by Madame Dubois' incredible courage and the resilience of St. Malo, please consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for watching.